Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap an action, war film based on the actual history of slave labor on an island during World War II in South Korea called the Battleship Island. Spoilers incoming. As men descend into the mines over a kilometer deep into the Sea of Japan, they face the harshest conditions set by their imperial overlords. Such circumstances lead to the death of one young boy burrowing himself into a tunnel that spurts seawater. He tries to hit the walls with his pickaxe, but it suddenly collapses and buries him alive. His own countrymen stood helpless watching him make his own grave, while the Japanese brushed it off. After mourning the loss of their comrade, several boys inquire the elder of their mining quarters, Yoon Hak Chul, about their daring escape off the island. While leaving their quarters in stormy weather, a searchlight beams upon one of the boys. He is shot as the two others exit through a mining shaft and jump into the sea. Unfortunately, they end up being captured by a Japanese boat that is patrolling the area. On February 7, 1945, at the Peninsula Hotel in Myeongdong, Seoul, bandmaster Lee Kang-ok with his daughter So-hee and their 7 other bandmates perform a labor mobilization program by the Japanese, in order to recruit more soldiers into the Imperial Army. A chief executive's wife tries to convince the clarinet player to play lively jazz for the congregation, despite jazz being outright banned by the Japanese, and so the Korean band plays the illegal tune. However, after a detective is on the search for Lee due to accusations of him fooling around with the chief executive's wife, alongside the arrival of the said chief executive, the bandmaster and his daughter hurriedly flee the scene. Japanese detective Sugiyama discusses with Kang-ok his charges, as they also talk about whether or not the musician alongside his colleagues gets drafted by the army in service of the emperor. Being under Sugiyama's debt, the officer arranges bribes for the bandmaster to dodge the draft. When asking about the situation of the war, the detective reveals that the Japanese army has been kicked out of the Philippines, signaling imminent defeat for the land of the rising sun. 5 days later, the Korean performers alongside the others ferry into Shimonoseki Harbor from Busan to be transported into Japan for unknown purposes. With some experiencing seasickness, among them was a newlywed who was abducted during his matrimonial ceremony, and a young man who was supposed to be in university. Kang-ok then discusses with his bandmates and his daughter their finances and upcoming situations. Suddenly, a brawl erupts underneath the bilges of the vessel, committed by Choi Chil-sung, a renowned gangster from the slums of Seoul. While the fight continues, the Japanese threaten to shoot them if it escalates any further. When a woman named Mal Nyun from the crowd finally calms down the delinquent man through rather uncomfortable means, the ferry finally makes a stop at the port of Shimonoseki. As the bandsmen descend from the ship and around the port, Lee fumbles upon his letters of recommendation sent in by Detective Sugiyama, towards an uncooperative Japanese clerk who refuses to entertain Kang-ok. Boarding a train into continuing another journey, nauseated So-hee and her father are loaded up onto another ship bound for Hashima. It turns out they weren't drafted but were instead sent off to labor on the island. So-hee gets separated from her father, as the women load onto a smaller boat and the men remain on the ferry. On the labor yards of the island, the men are being examined and rid of their possessions, while the women are being medically evaluated for venereal diseases. As he and his fellow men were being inspected for contraband, he speaks to a Korean-speaking warden. He explains his situation to save himself and his bandmates by saying that they're musicians. A Japanese officer approaches Kang-ok and asks if his band could play the tune, Cherry Blossoms of the same class, where Lee instructs his band members to start playing, as the Japanese themselves sing along with their music. The manager of the island, Shimazaki Daisuke, arrives to address the workers of the mine. After praising the performance of the Korean musicians, he informs the workers why they are in the mine. All 400 laborers are forcefully taken in by the company managing the mine in order to contribute to the war effort. As the men destined to work for the mine are cleaned off and taken into their living quarters, the company announces that all their wages are spent on their expenses from getting and being on the island. Adding to this, their labor will not be paid and will be used to rack up debt working for the company. The women, however, are exempt from working at the mines but are instead assigned as comfort women for the Japanese. Bathing in the men's quarters, another fight happens as Chil-sung challenges a warden into battle. He tells the Japanese, through Lee as interpreter, that if he wins, he gets his position. The fight eventually becomes brutal, but the Japanese put a stop to it and establish his terms. Wherein, Choi and his gang become the governors of the Koreans. Meanwhile, in the manager's living quarters where So-hee resides as a comfort woman, she becomes frightened when it's revealed to her she will be used as a plaything for the Japanese. And so she tries to escape her fate by proclaiming that she was the one singing with her father's band on the radio, that played one of their songs. She adds that she can do music-related works other than being an army comfort woman. After praising the emperor, Shimazaki lets her off and recalls the rest of the musicians from working at the mine. Upon seeing her, her father smiles knowing that his daughter had used her connections to save themselves from their labors and violations. Somewhere in China in July 1945, resides a hidden base camp of the Korean Liberation Army in collaboration with American OSS troops. Here, the Koreans acquire intel from their American allies that a new type of bomb has been detonated in the New Mexican desert. They are planning on dropping it on Japan, while also inferring that the USSR was also joining the war, tipping the scales fully against Japan's favor. Park Moo-young, an agent for the Joint OSS-Korean Liberation Front, was assigned to fetch for them a certain Yoon Hak-chul. He was apparently sent to the mines in lieu of his execution due to his role as a financial manager of an organization connected to the Korean cause. The man could potentially solve internal conflicts in the aftermath of the war, and so Park leaves to go to the mines. Back at the mines, a mine cart accident occurs in one of the tunnels, namely the Korean section of the mine, which triggers an explosion, resulting in several dead and others injured, including Hak-chul. The Japanese then plan on burying the residing miners inside their hole, but one of the miners got them out. He uses a gas explosion in a section that connects the Korean tunnel to another tunnel, and this infuriates the management. When Shimazaki threatens to take So-hee from Lee to have as an adoptive daughter for the head of the office of the mine, the musician begins to worry for the safety of his child. Fortunately, Park, whose plans of escaping with Yoon, stumbles upon Kang Ok, who negotiates with him, leading to all of them escaping together out of the mine. Through this, Park and his men ask for Lee's connections with the Japanese officers to acquire a key for the telegraph office to communicate with the Liberation Army. Lee finally manages to acquire a few copies of the key for the telegraph room, while Park and Yoon attempt to escape. During this, Lee and his girl were exempted from escaping with the agent and the leader of the Koreans of the mine. Upon knowing this, it drives him into conflict with Park for retracting his promise after the agent broke into the office. However, Park also discovers through the accounting documents he acquired that Yoon was complicit with the Japanese in the corruption of the finances regarding the expenses of the Koreans in the mine, wherein the money that was supposed to be paid for the workers went to the account of Shimazaki through Hak-chul's, where he is entitled to half the amount. Out of nowhere, Lee and So-hee enter the scene along with one of Yoon's men amidst the confusion. As they fall into an argument, a bombing siren is being heard around the island. B-29 American bombers fly over and deliver their payload below the ailing miners. Japanese and Koreans alike weren't spared from the devastation. After the firebombing of the island, the news about a bomb so powerful that hit Hiroshima had killed 100,000 people. Chaos follows, and Yoon shoots Park but leaves him escaping while injured, whilst shooting dead his follower who witnessed Park's statements about the man. Now, he's on the lookout in the decimated coal mine for Kang Ok and his daughter, since they had witnessed his crime, but fortunately escapes as well. As the Japanese officials panic over the carnage of Koreans, they begin to realize that the war hasn't been in their favor for a very long time, and that they will greatly pay for the wages of their crimes. Shimazaki, heavily injured by the bombing, is murdered by a man named Yamada, who replaces him as manager. They prompt a conspiracy where a Japanese schoolgirl was murdered by a Korean, witnessed by a Korean warden. This is to instill instability among them, and turn the island into their graves. When they accuse Choi of the murder of the schoolgirl, who was nowhere near the incident, they begin torturing him. As Lee with an injured Park talks about escaping all Koreans off the island, Yoon, being a puppet of Yamada, commands all Koreans still alive that the Japanese would compensate them after the bombing and would set them free only if they plan on working in the mines one last time. Unknown to them, it was the Japanese's plan to bury them all alive. Before he could fully convince anyone, Park murders him in front of everyone as he, Lee and his daughter, and apparently another witness saw Yoon murdering his henchmen, testify against him. With nothing more to lose but their lives, the Koreans under Park plan a daring escape from their prison by escaping into a coal transport ship. Once all their parameters were met, such as burning their quarters to distract the Japanese and having squads pass through undetected with their weaponry, they began their escape in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, during the escape, they were spotted by the Japanese and a fight transpires. Koreans of all walks of life stood their ground against the ruthless Japanese conquerors, fighting them to their last breath while simultaneously letting the wounded and injured board the coal transport. However, the platform where the escapees were boarding the ship suddenly collapses under their weight amidst the open fire. But their bravery outweighs their dangers, and with Kong Ok's initiative, he grabs an imperial flag to use it as a rope and pulls up the collapsed platform alongside fellow Koreans to lift it. They successfully landed on top of the wall between the mining grounds and the sea as a ladder. Earlier on, Mal Nyun along with Choi's gang helps him escape from his torture chamber, and the gangster initially goes to the armory to fight against the Japanese without any consideration for the escaping Koreans. Once the Koreans show massive success and fortitude, Mal Nyun and Choi begin assisting Park as they shoot at the Japanese, who have run out of bullets and began their signature banzai charges. This eventually kills both Mal Nyun and Choi in the process. Yamada himself joins the banzai charges alongside his men, and much to his hatred against the Koreans, as Lee and his daughter escape for the platform, the deranged manager shoots the musician on his side, as well as Park. On the other hand, the agent manages to return a shot against him, while So-hee throws a Molotov towards the madman's direction, incinerating him before Park ultimately beheads the manager with his own blade. Discouraged by their leader's death, the remaining Japanese soldiers held their fire, and finally, let the Koreans escape. Aboard the coal transport, a weeping So-hee is being consoled by her dying father as he insists that he won't die. Park finally achieves escaping all remaining Koreans off the island, but with a heavy cost. Realizing that his injury is fatal, the bandmaster, who is being surrounded by his remaining bandmates including his daughter, taunts him to tell Park to take care of So-hee for him. Seeing her father nearing his death, her weeps become louder and louder. But just before he does, he asks his daughter to sing a song for him, only to be met with cries of sorrow after he passes right in front of everyone. Upon his death, the situation itself is already bleak, but only gets even bleaker when the sky alights a second sun over the horizon from the direction of the Nagasaki Peninsula. The second atomic bomb vaporizes the city off the face of Earth, and the ones on board can only watch. Despite bearing witness to their enemies who are finally facing punishments for their inhumane crimes, fellow Koreans being caught in the blast only tells them that in warfare, there are no true winners, only survivors. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.